And now, a word from our sponsor, AstraZeneca. Please welcome back to the stage Joe Ruffalo, General Manager of The Hill, joined this time by David Fredrickson, Executive Vice President of Oncology Business Unit with AstraZeneca. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, David. Thank you so much for being here today.
Absolute pleasure.
Why don't we start just telling us a little bit about your role and the role that AstraZeneca is playing in the oncology space and some of the things that you're excited about.
Yeah, well, super. I think maybe if I just start first with my role, the role that I have is that I, alongside with my colleague who's the head of research and development, we make the decision on the medicines and the clinical trials that we want to be advancing forward. But I think secondly, and this is really kind of what my whole day-to-day is about and what I think we heard a lot about in the last session, is it's not just about how do we get to great clinical trial results, but ensure the delivery of those medicines across the globe. And so that is a core part of the work that I do, which is focusing in on what are the gaps in care. We heard Dr. Carnival talk very exquisitely about the need to start thinking about screening, diagnosis, how that then moves into access to medicines, innovative medicines, and on through survivorship. We heard Dr. Knudsen talk about the same from the context of a great and I think very important example in colorectal cancer. So my role is really to try to understand how do we close these gaps in care that are essential to achieving the best possible outcomes. In terms of what I'm excited about, I actually think that we are at a place where it is no longer science fiction to think about what eliminating cancer as a cause of death could look like. I think that cancer is a disease that comes in multiple forms. We oftentimes simplify it so that it's approachable, I think, for kind of the lay audience. But I do think in many of its forms, the progress that we are making on science and technology and data is creating a real optimism that there is an opportunity to be able to deliver these cures. And I think that AstraZeneca is at the forefront of leading a lot of that work and a lot of that effort.
It's great. It's an exciting time. In the wake of the Inflation Reduction Act, there's been a lot of discussion about the impact it could have on the innovation pipeline. What are you seeing?
Well, I think it was really quite nicely put by Steve Ubel in terms of, and in fact, Dr. Huddis's example was very poignant of how copay has a direct impact on adherence to and fulfillment of the utilization of medicines. I think it's important to note, and the reason why I think that within IRA, one of the important parts is copay capping, and this copay smoothing is so important, is that actually for many private or so-called commercially insured patients, industry is able to work to actually reduce the copay down to zero. But anti-kickback statutes make that not possible for Medicare patients. So actually, within this context, it's really important that IRA is having the government take a role in making sure that the statute allows for copay affordability support in the way that it does. Unfortunately, the IRA does have some areas of unintended consequences, and I think one of the most notable of these is with price setting. And I guess I'd like to bring that example, Joe, to life for a second. So AstraZeneca's launched 7 new oncology medicines since 2014. Of those new oncology medicines, all of them have multiple indications or multiple types of cancers that they've now been approved for use in the United States. And for about half of those, the first indication that we launch into has been in a very small orphan indication. So one example is a medicine of ours called Lynparza. Lynparza launched in 2014 into BRCA-mutated second, third line ovarian cancer. We went into that space in large part because there's huge incentives to move science quickly through things like the Orphan Drug Act. And the Orphan Drug Act has created a space for 600 medicines and over 1,000 indications in rarer cancers to become available to American patients. And the BRCA ovarian cancer approval is a very example of that type of situation. Unfortunately, with the IRA, with the price setting mechanism that comes in place, it creates a huge disincentive to launch into these smaller, very rare cancers. And the reason is it starts this negotiation clock of 9 and 13 years that Steve talked about. And so the implication will be that we'll still do the investments into rare cancers. It's just we will launch them into other parts of the globe, and we would wait to launch them into the United States until we've actually got a rational reason to start this negotiation clock. And that's a decision that nobody in industry wants to take. And for that reason, we are really focused in on how can we make technical fixes today to the implementation and the rules for the Inflation Reduction Act to preserve this incentive for innovation into these rare cancers and rare diseases. And we need to have those incentives into rare diseases because there's nothing more inherently inequitable than a genetic reason that you have a rare cancer. And it's small, and these are small costs to the entire population and society, and they need incentives for people to be able to want to invest in them.
So what are some of the changes you really want to see in the IRA?
Well, I think that the here and now opportunity is that there is a bipartisan introduced bill called the Orphan Cures Act. And I'm just going to read because otherwise I'll get it a little bit wrong. But it's Optimizing Research Progress, Hope, and New Cures. It's Orphan Cures. It's bipartisan. It's been put forth within the House from Congressman Nigel as well as with Congressman Joyce. Within the Senate, it has bipartisan support from Senator Carper and also from Senator Barrasso. And really what it does is it looks at preserving the incentives from the Orphan Drug Act. And there's mechanisms in IRA to allow for an orphan drug exclusion to price setting. And it puts technical fixes around when the clock starts and when it ends that protect orphan indications and protects the incentive to exist there. And that's been moving forward, and it's at a place where it's in committee. And I think there's opportunity to see that there are both sides of the aisle that are interested in making sure that these incentives are preserved, because I think that they're really unintended consequences of a piece of legislation that's trying to get at some other dimensions and weren't intending to try to create disincentives in these spaces.
That's great. Well, David, thank you so much for your time today and your insights and all the work you're doing.
Yeah, thank you very much. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.